I'd now finally like to call Farah Chaliza, our human rights attorney, to read a legal briefing on what uniformed service members can do to refuse illegal orders.
Hi everybody, my name is Farah Chalisa, that's Farahchalisa, and I am a human rights attorney here in Chicago. I'm going to start by telling you about a story. I'm also taking us back to March 1968, the 16th to be exact, during the Vietnam War. On this day, a company of American soldiers walked into a cluster of hamlets in South Vietnam called My Lai, expecting to find enemy fighters. What they found instead were farmers, women, children, infants. Over the next 4 hours, they shot them mercilessly. The US military herded families into ditches and opened fire. They burned down homes with people still inside, with children still inside. They interrupted mothers feeding their infants and shot them. When it was over, more than 500 unarmed people were dead. The youngest victims were babies. The oldest were in their 80s. Hugh Thompson was a 24-year-old helicopter flying reconnaissance. When he saw what was happening on the ground, he landed the helicopter between the American soldiers and a group of villagers hiding in a bunker and ordered his own door gunner to fire on his fellow American soldiers if they kept attacking those villages. Then he got out and he personally carried wounded children out of a ditch full of bodies to get them to safety. Hugh Thompson's actions sound heroic to us today, but he was not called a hero after that attack. He was not called a hero for over 50 years after he saved the children remaining in those villages. In fact, he was called a traitor. It took the United States Army over 30 years to give him a medal for what he did that morning, and that massacre is still rarely acknowledged by the US government. When the case finally went to trial, the lieutenant who led that massacre, William Calley, said that he was just following his captain's orders. The military rejected that defense, and William Calley was convicted of murder. 25 people were investigated in that chain of command, but the only one who was convicted was the man who pulled the trigger, Calley. See, in every war, there is a Calley and there is a Thompson. The law exists so that US military knows which one to be. I am here today because I believe that this country is ordering its service members once again to engage in unlawful and illegal actions. The law already gives every one of them everything they need to be able to take the path of Hugh Thompson so that history can look down on them kindly. Here's what that law actually says. Every person who has ever worn this country's uniform took an oath. It does not say, "I will obey the President of the United States." That oath is to defend the Constitution against all enemies, whether they be foreign or domestic, whether they be in the government or outside of it. When an order violates that document, the US Constitution, then that order was never lawful to begin with, no matter whose signature sits underneath that order. The Uniform Code of Military Justice is the body of law that governs the military, and it does not require immediate obedience to all unlawful orders. It only requires obedience to lawful orders. Although an order may be presumed lawful, that presumption breaks the moment the order, in the actual words of military law, is patently illegal, such as one that directs the commission of a crime. And the standard for knowing that is not a law degree. It's what Hugh Thompson knew looking down from that helicopter. The standard is to understand what would be the commission of a crime from the perspective of any ordinary, reasonable person. What would an ordinary, reasonable person understand as an illegal, unlawful, or an ethical action? Although what happened with William Calley, Hugh Thompson, and the villages of My Lai are history, this question, the question of whether service members have to obey unlawful orders, is not. It is the present. This week, American service members are flying combat missions over Iran, not under a declaration of war, which Congress hasn't actually issued for any war since World War II. and not under any authorization for this war. In fact, Congress actually voted against this war. In June, the House voted 215 to 208 to end this war, and weeks later, the Senate did the same, with Republicans crossing party lines. Both chambers said, you may not continue this war without our authorization. Yet, the president has continued it anyways. Here's what that war has actually looked like. A U.S. missile struck an elementary school in a town called Minab. More than 150 people were killed. 120 of them were children. Asked about it, President Donald Trump suggested that Iran was somehow responsible for that strike, that they were responsible for the deaths of 120 children. 4 months later, there has been no public report, no accountability, nothing but silence from the government. Striking a school full of children is a war crime under the same law that convicted Lieutenant Calley, and any ordinary reasonable person would know that striking a school of children is a crime. And yet it has not stopped. This week, as we're standing here speaking, U.S. strikes hit the airport in Iran Share and killed civilians there. 2 days ago, a strike landed so close to a children's cancer hospital that families were carrying their kids outside as those kids were still hooked to oxygen tanks. Tell me that that is not a crime. I call it what my law license has taught me to call it. That is murder. That is a war crime. And it is a murder whether it happens on a battlefield or a boat. The Secretary of War told us in his actual guidance for this campaign, in his own words, that the goal was maximum lethality, not tepid legality. Legality has never been the focus of this administration's actions, far be it now. This May, the department's own Inspector General reported that it had gutted the program Congress required by law to prevent exactly what happened at that school in Minab, stopped funding it, lost the staff, and asked Congress to repeal the law requiring it exist. In November, 6 members of Congress, 5 military veterans, including retired Navy pilot and astronaut Mark Kelly, read the actual text of military law on camera. You can refuse illegal orders. For that, the president called him a traitor and called his words sedition as punishable by death. Once again, the government is calling the hero in the story a traitor. The Department of War opened a court-martial review of a sitting senator for saying something that we have known to be true since the Nuremberg trials. That is not sedition. And the fact that they're furious about it being exposed to the country, that military can obey unlawful orders, tells you everything you need to know. And it tells you that they know that too. So here's what I want every service member in the United States to listen to and to understand plainly. You do not need anyone's permission to refuse to bomb a country Congress has told this president he cannot bomb. You do not need anyone's permission to refuse an order to fire on people without due process. You do not need anyone's permission to refuse an order to fire on someone who is trying to surrender. You do not need anyone's permission to refuse an order to strike a hospital, a school, or civilians who are wounded, even those who are non-civilians but who are wounded and no longer part of the fight. You do not need anyone's permission to refuse an order to punish a family or a neighborhood for something they had no part in. You do not need anyone's permission to refuse an order to turn your weapon onto your own neighbors in American cities. It does not matter where you're standing when the order comes in, whether you're in a ship in the Caribbean or a street in Washington, whether in a village in Vietnam or a town in Iran. You swore the same oath and your obligation is the same. And it's not just that you are allowed to refuse unlawful orders, but that if you carry out unlawful orders, history will hold you accountable. History will not remember you kindly. History will not remember you as the heroes you may have joined the military to be. They will remember you as the villains of the story of thousands and millions of innocent civilians killed by this country. Remember, there is no time limit on a war crime. History remembers the soldier who followed the order, not the man behind the desk who gave it. Although the man behind the desk will not be remembered kindly as well. Remember, with Thompson, refusing was not betrayal. He was called a traitor. He was accused of sedition. But now we understand his actions were heroic. And though it took his own country 30 years to admit it, it is how he will always be remembered, and it is the example that he has set for all service members going forward. There are lawyers ready to stand behind every service member who refuses, and that includes me. This war on Iran is illegal. The boat strikes carried out by this administration are illegal. No soldier, sailor, airman, or marine in this country is obligated to carry out either one, regardless of what President Donald Trump says. So be Hugh Thompson, not Charlie. Know the law. Trust your conscience. Refuse. And when you do, we will be there standing behind you to support you. Thank you.